Rob will be a familiar face to many, but for some he'll be a new face, and it's an opportunity to get to know you, Rob. I know very little about your work, but I know that you call yourself a countryside reconciliation practitioner. I'm going to find out a little bit more about that later on, probably. But Rob, there's much talk in the media about rewilding and its benefits, and about tree planting for nature recovery. However, this appears sometimes to conflict with what we hear about the views of some of the farmers who've been custodians of the land for many generations. Do you have any views on this topic?
What a question to start with, Julian. I mean, coming straight in with the curveball, but in fact, I want to talk about a little bit of context. Let's wind back 5,000 years, and when the UK started to farm, to clear the forest in order to produce food and to be able to construct boats and navies, etc. And I think that context, and of course, we've got a couple of world wars to slip in there as well, because all of that history and all of that past is really important context as to why we are here today. And I think we miss that too often. I think the modern way is to come up with a solution without any context about what's gone beforehand. So when you ask, what do I think about rewilding and planting lots of trees? Well, let's start with World War II, which actually had ramifications for tree planting, rewilding, food production, etc. And as you know, after the war, we as an island were terrified of losing our self-sufficiency in food production. And so the government, of course, used all methods to encourage farmers, land managers to produce more food. The Archers in 1955 was a government information program to encourage farmers to grow more food, to use efficient methods. And so that generation of farmers are still with us now at the kitchen table. And I've written about this quite a lot. The same generation post-war are at the kitchen table as we ask new generations of farmers and land managers and foresters, because of course that was the same thing applied to forestry. And 2 years ago, the Forestry Commission was 100 years old. That was about producing more timber in the UK. And so the landscape changed hugely in that time. But we mustn't forget that generation of farmers are still with us at that kitchen table. And I think that's the big journey, is to reconcile, and I've just used that word now because there are so many shifting objectives which have suddenly appeared, which go contrary to what farmers and land managers were asked to do 40, 50 years ago, which to most people is a long time ago, but not in the context of UK countryside. That's a blip. We find it hard to maybe grapple with some of these things. I get terrified, like everyone else, about how big this is. And so what someone told me the other day is that within our DNA, our ancient DNA, is this simplicity. We want it simple. And that's based on, we hear a rustle in the undergrowth, and we want to know, is it going to kill us or not? We want A or B. We want binary. Because I've always railed against things are too binary, things are too reductionist, too simple. And it was wonderful having that explained about that's how we want to see things, A or B, good or bad. And that loses all the nuance. And so that's why, as a rural reconciliator, as a rural commentator, I'm incredibly unpopular because I'm digging out the nuance between all of these different issues. And there's a lovely saying from a philosopher from the 19th century: for every complex problem, there is an answer which is clear, simple, and wrong. Now that really, that gets people's goats. So the long-term survivability of the human race on the planet, and the planet, by the way, is going to be fine because, again, humans are only a tiny blip on it. Politicians go against that. So in fact, we have a democracy, which is wonderful, but actually it's contrary to what it should be for the long-term survival of possibly the human race. But maybe we're getting too deep at this time of the morning.
So you talk about countryside reconciliation. What do you mean by that term? Who are you reconciling, and what are the main issues that you're reconciling between them?
And it's not for me to reconcile anybody. It's up to everybody what they want to do. But I suppose I might give an example. About 8 years ago, I gave a little talk in Kumyoy Village Hall, just down the road from where I live in the Black Mountains. And it was about this idea of rewilding, which some people see as just managing land in a different way. Other people see it as a way of reclaiming the land from humans and letting it go back to nature. Many definitions around it. And I suppose my role was to petition the hill farmers to be in the room. And so I went round to the doors, knocked on the doors, rang some of the hill farmers who live up behind me, because I wanted them to be in the room, to be part of this conversation, bottom up, to hear it. I wasn't there to say, this is the way to do it. I just wanted to air something which the complex narrative needed to be just framed in all its complexity, and then people can understand what we need to deal with. Because at this stage, a number of commentators who push rewilding, and they put it in a newspaper, and then it goes viral on social media. And actually that bypasses the people who need to be part of the conversation, who may not be the same people as those that want to be part of the conversation. Subtle difference there. People that need to be part of it are those the people that live in these hills, which I would argue in the Black Mountains are being rewilded anyway. There used to be 150 little farm holdings tucked away up in these hills, all farming intensively, not intensification, not with sprays, intensively surviving over 20 acres, growing barley, potatoes, and pigs. Lovely little mixed farm holdings. Those have all gone now, and the scrub is coming. And it's a wild place. I love it. And so we've got this highly bucolic, beautiful countryside with a highly urbanized nation. And we've got to reconcile how we live our lives. And that's all of us. That's not just the hill farmer scratching a living on the hills. It's the person driving the SUV with the heating on at 19, 20, 21 degrees, blocking up the gaps to make it more energy efficient, which of course is good, unless of course you want swifts and swallows and house martins. But that's another debate, because everything is about trade-offs.
Okay, can we move on to another question, which is about climate change? Obviously, we're looking to become more of a zero carbon economy over the next few years. What implications do you think that will have on our local landscape? Particularly as I suppose we're looking to use renewable energy more than we have done in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think before renewable energy, we've got to look at energy efficiency, which is so dull. It's really not going to get the headlines of saying we need to create more energy. It's the dull stuff, which is not wasting energy, making our houses more efficient. And of course, the government's been talking about this. We all thought gas boilers were brilliant. We all thought diesel cars were brilliant. In fact, that's now going to become outdated, and we've got to have hydrogen boilers and we have electric cars. So the cost ramification is the first thing. When you're talking about the landscape, well, the landscape is evolving continually. We like to stick it into aspect. I mean, I live in the Brecon Beacons National Park, wonderful place. However, the policy of the national park is somewhat prescriptive, and it says this is the landscape that we like and we want, but it's going to involve change. Some of it would be very positive. So if we still need to have livestock. I think there's this kind of livestock are bad, veganism is the way forward. That's another simplistic binary way of looking at something. However, it does also mean that we need to change our farming practices, and there will be winners and losers. And I think we can make that journey in a much better way. But I also accept that if people want to lobby and to look after what they've done for generations, it's very understandable to want to do that. So I think as a society, we've got to somehow create a conduit, a way of doing this transition So I think we're in a very dysfunctional time, and I think we have to be in a way, because that's the only way. For out of chaos will come some kind of order, but it's going to take maybe 15, 20 years, and there will be collateral. And I think that's the toughest thing, is that the ways that we used to do things will change, but it's how we manage that change, which to me is about trying to do reconciliation. When you ask me the question about how the landscape will change due to climate change, well, we've got to be careful about the trees that we're planting now. If we're planting lovely native trees, they might all be dead in 15 years' time because climate change has overtaken them. So I've been arguing, and I've written about it in the Times, we should be planting all types of trees. We must get away from ideology and ideals about native trees only. We've got to look at all kinds of trees. And I'm lucky to have a couple of acres here. And 8 years ago, I planted my wood, and it's got 23 different types of trees. It's got Norway spruce, it's got birch, it's got cherry trees. But I didn't do it with a public grant because they would have told me what to do. So kind of climate change is going to tell us what to do, but we won't be able to do it within the books that we want to do it in.
Yes. So Rob, finally, as a church warden, and with a sort of a church perspective on the environment, is there any, does this make any difference to the way that you view countryside issues?
Absolutely, absolutely. One of my biggest driving things within me, it's a kind of burning flame, is to stand up for remote rural communities. Now, I know there's lots of non-remote rural communities, but I'm thinking about rural communities who are distant to a lot of these conversations, and the way that regulations sometimes come from the top down rather than trying to work with local communities to work out what the regulations would be, which would also sustain the rural economy, which is a part of the rural community. And I think the church's role, and yeah, I know you don't want me to say this, but in order to keep the little church going and to keep a place of succor where people can come together, it's really important to sometimes break a few rules so that people can come to service, a small service, even if it's outside, it's all space, but it's apparently not in the book. And that is more important, to keep those communities together. And also in this time of massive change, I want farmers and land managers and foresters to be able to stay in that community, but they're going to have to change. Some of them are going to have to change what they're producing. And rather than them throw in the towel, I'm really keen that people can adjust. And I'm being hesitant because it's not an easy journey. We need rural psychologists within the rural sector right now. And again, I suppose that, for many, the church is a psychologist. And I think that's a really important role. But it's not in the book. It's done in a different way because that's how the countryside's always operated.
Well, thank you very much, Rob. That leaves us with something very much to think about as we think about the church's role in society today. And perhaps a lot of us may not have thought about our role in relation to farming and the landscape, but you've given us plenty to reflect on there. Thank you very much, Rob.
Thank you, Julian.